Picture this. It's November 2026, and millions of Americans are heading to the polls to decide not just who represents them in Congress, but the very future of American military power, our role on the world stage, and whether the sacrifices of our service members will be honored or abandoned. The 2026 midterm elections aren't just another political contest. They're a referendum on American strength, military readiness, veterans' rights, and our commitment to defending freedom in an increasingly dangerous world. From the mountains of Afghanistan to the tech corridors of the Pentagon, from veterans' hospitals across the nation to the classified briefing rooms where our next conflicts are being planned, everything hangs in the balance. This is the story of what the 2026 midterms really mean for America's military, our warriors, and our national security. Let's start with something most Americans don't fully understand. The midterm elections of 2026 will determine control of the House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate. But here's what makes this different from any other midterm in recent memory. We're living through one of the most volatile periods in global security since the Cold War ended. China is flexing its muscles in the Pacific. Russia continues its aggression. Iran is inching closer to nuclear capability. North Korea remains unpredictable and dangerous. And here at home, we're grappling with questions that strike at the heart of who we are as a nation. How big should our military be? How much should we spend on defense? What do we owe our veterans? Should we intervene in foreign conflicts or focus on defending our homeland? These aren't abstract policy debates for Washington elites. These are life and death questions that affect real people, real families, real communities across America. Let me take you back for a moment. Think about the wars we've fought since the turn of the century. Afghanistan, the longest war in American history, ended in a chaotic withdrawal in August 2021 that left many Americans questioning our military strategy and political leadership. Iraq saw American troops deployed, withdrawn, and redeployed as threats evolved. Syria became a complex chessboard where American Special Operations Forces operated in the shadows. Yemen, Somalia, and other theaters saw American military involvement that most citizens barely knew about. Thousands of American service members gave their lives. Tens of thousands came home with wounds visible and invisible. Hundreds of thousands of families endured deployments, relocations, and the constant anxiety of having a loved one in harm's way. And through it all, there was one constant question that echoed from military bases to kitchen tables across the nation. Is this worth it? Are our leaders making the right calls? Do they understand what they're asking of our military families? Now here we are in 2026, and those questions haven't gone away. They've only gotten more urgent. The political landscape has shifted dramatically. President Trump began his second term in January 2025, bringing with him a distinctly different approach to military affairs than his predecessor. His administration has signaled major changes in defense priorities, military spending, and America's posture toward allies and adversaries alike. But Trump doesn't control Congress. The legislative branch holds the purse strings. They decide how much money goes to the Pentagon. They authorize military operations. They provide oversight of how our armed forces are used. And in November 2026, the American people will decide who holds that power. Let's talk numbers for a minute, because they matter more than you might think. The United States military budget for fiscal year 2025 exceeded $800 billion. That's not a typo. $800 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the next 10 countries combined spend on their militaries. It's enough to fund massive aircraft carrier battle groups, cutting-edge fighter jets, cybersecurity operations, nuclear weapons maintenance, bases on every continent, and personnel costs for over 2 million active duty, reserve, and National Guard members plus civilian employees. But here's the thing. Both political parties argue about whether that's too much or not nearly enough. Republicans generally push for increased defense spending, arguing that threats from China and Russia require robust military capabilities and that underfunding defense puts American lives at risk. Democrats are split. Some support strong defense spending while redirecting priorities toward cyber warfare and away from legacy systems. Others argue that military budgets are bloated, that we're spending money on weapons systems designed for old wars while neglecting the needs of veterans and investing too little in diplomacy that might prevent wars in the first place. The 2026 midterms will determine which vision wins. If Republicans gain or maintain control of both chambers, expect defense budgets to grow even larger. Expect more funding for traditional military hardware like ships, planes, and tanks. Expect a harder line on China with increased military presence in the Pacific. Expect continued support for defense contractors and military installations in key districts. If Democrats make gains, especially progressives within the party, you'll likely see efforts to cap or even reduce military spending, shift resources toward veterans' healthcare and benefits, invest more heavily in diplomatic solutions, and push for greater accountability on how defense dollars are spent. Split control would mean gridlock, negotiations, and compromises that might satisfy no one, but could represent the messy reality of democratic governance. Now let's get real about what's actually happening with our military right now. Recruitment is in crisis. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps have all struggled to meet recruitment goals in recent years. Why? Multiple factors. The strong civilian job market makes military service less attractive financially. Only about 23% of young Americans are physically qualified, mentally qualified, morally qualified, and interested in serving. That's a stunning statistic. More than 3/4 of military-age Americans can't or won't serve. Physical fitness is declining among young people. Mental health issues are on the rise. Drug use disqualifies many potential recruits. And frankly, after 20 years of war in the Middle East, many families are skeptical about encouraging their children to enlist. This recruitment crisis has serious implications. A smaller pool of recruits means the military has to lower standards or offer bigger incentives or both. It means units might not be at full strength when needed. It means less diversity in the ranks. It means we're asking more of fewer people. And it raises fundamental questions about whether America still has the civic culture that produces the warriors we need. The 2026 elections will influence how we address this crisis. Will we increase pay and benefits to make service more attractive? Will we invest in programs that prepare young people physically and mentally for military service? Will we expand pathways to citizenship for immigrants who serve? Will we reconsider the all-volunteer force and debate returning to some form of mandatory service? These are contentious questions with no easy answers, and the people we elect in 2026 will shape the debate. Let's shift gears and talk about the veterans. There are roughly 18 million veterans living in America today. 18 million men and women who raised their right hand, took an oath, and served their country. They vote at higher rates than the general population. They're spread across every state and congressional district. They represent a powerful political constituency that both parties court aggressively. But here's the uncomfortable truth. We're failing our veterans in fundamental ways. The Department of Veterans Affairs operates the largest integrated healthcare system in America, but it's plagued by problems. Wait times for appointments can stretch for months. Facilities are aging, and in some cases inadequate. The VA struggles to retain doctors and nurses who can make more money in the private sector. Mental health services are overwhelmed. The veteran suicide rate is catastrophic. We lose roughly 17 veterans a day to suicide. Think about that. Every single day, 17 men and women who survived combat, training accidents, and the challenges of military service take their own lives. That's not a statistic. That's a moral crisis. Homelessness among veterans remains stubbornly high. On any given night, roughly 40,000 veterans are homeless in America. These are people who defended our nation, and they're sleeping on streets, in shelters, or in their cars. Benefits claims take forever to process. Veterans wait months, or even years for disability ratings that determine their compensation. The bureaucracy is nightmarish. The appeals process is Byzantine. And meanwhile, veterans and their families struggle to make ends meet, to get the health care they need, to transition to civilian careers. The 2026 midterms matter enormously for veterans because the next Congress will decide VA funding levels, whether to expand or restrict benefits, how aggressively to address suicide prevention and mental health, whether to increase accountability for VA leadership when systems fail, and whether to allow more private sector healthcare options or invest in strengthening the VA itself. Different candidates have radically different visions. Some want to fully privatize VA healthcare, arguing that veterans should be able to see any doctor anywhere and that government-run healthcare is inherently inefficient. Others insist the VA, despite its flaws, provides specialized care for service-related injuries and conditions that private doctors often don't understand, and that dismantling it would be a betrayal. This isn't theoretical. Veterans are watching closely, and they'll remember who fought for them and who didn't. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention. Military families. For every service member, there's usually a spouse, children, parents, siblings. The military isn't just asking individuals to serve. It's asking entire families to sacrifice. And those families face challenges that most Americans never think about. Frequent moves that disrupt children's education and make it hard for spouses to maintain careers. Deployments that leave one parent to handle everything alone for months or even a year at a time. The constant stress of knowing you're loved, one might be in danger. Living far from extended family support networks. Dealing with military housing that's sometimes substandard despite high costs. Navigating a complex benefits system. Trying to access mental health care for kids who are struggling with a parent's deployment or injury. Military spouse unemployment is significantly higher than the national average because it's hard to build a career when you're moving every 2 or 3 years. Childcare on or near military bases is often inadequate and expensive. Schools near bases are sometimes overcrowded and underfunded. And when service members come home with physical injuries or PTSD, the whole family deals with the aftermath. The caregiver burden often falls on spouses who suddenly have to manage medical appointments, therapy sessions, medication schedules, and the emotional toll of watching someone they love struggle. These families need support, and the 2026 elections will determine what kind of support they get. Will Congress fund better housing? Will they invest in spouse employment programs? Will they expand childcare access? Will they improve schools on or near installations? Will they ensure that caregivers receive respectable stipends and benefits? These aren't luxury items. They're basic quality of life issues that affect retention and readiness. Let's zoom out to the global picture, because American military policy doesn't exist in a vacuum. Right now, the greatest long-term strategic challenge facing the United States is China. The People's Republic of China has spent decades building up its military, modernizing its forces, and asserting itself regionally and globally. The People's Liberation Army is now the largest military in the world by personnel. China's Navy has more ships than the US Navy, though ours are generally more capable. China is investing heavily in advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, quantum computing, and space-based capabilities. They've built artificial islands in the South China Sea and militarized them with airstrips, radar installations, and missile systems. They've been increasingly aggressive toward Taiwan, conducting military exercises that look like rehearsals for invasion. They've clashed with India along disputed borders. They've used economic coercion against countries that cross them. The question for American voters is simple but profound. How should we respond? Do we massively increase military spending to maintain superiority over China? Do we build more ships, more planes, more bases in the Pacific? Do we strengthen alliances with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and other regional partners? Do we make crystal clear that we'll defend Taiwan if China invades? Or do we seek accommodation, avoid unnecessary confrontation, focus on economic competition rather than military posturing, and accept that China will be a major power with its own sphere of influence? The politicians elected in 2026 will shape this debate. Hawks will push for confrontation and strength. Doves will warn against a new Cold War. And most voters will be somewhere in the middle, wanting to stand up to China, but not wanting to stumble into a catastrophic war. Then there's Russia. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 shattered any illusions about post-Cold War peace in Europe. That war is still grinding on, with hundreds of thousands of casualties and no clear end in sight. The United States has provided tens of billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine, but we haven't sent American troops to fight. That distinction matters enormously. Supporting Ukraine militarily without direct involvement is a delicate balance. Some argue we're not doing enough, that we should provide more advanced weapons faster, and make clear that NATO will defend every inch of its territory. Others worry we're being drawn into a proxy war with a nuclear-armed power, and that we're spending billions on Ukraine while Americans struggle at home. The 2026 midterms will influence whether aid to Ukraine continues, expands, or gets cut off. They'll determine whether America remains committed to NATO, or whether we pull back from European security commitments. They'll shape how we respond to Russian aggression elsewhere, whether in cyber attacks, election interference, or threats against other neighbors. Don't forget the Middle East. It never really goes away, does it? Iran remains a major concern. Their nuclear program continues despite international pressure. They support proxy forces throughout the region. They threaten Israel and American interests. American troops are still deployed in Iraq and Syria in various capacities. Terrorist groups like ISIS have been degraded, but not eliminated. The Abraham Accords normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, but Palestinian issues remain unresolved and tensions periodically explode into violence. Yemen's civil war continues with humanitarian catastrophe. The entire region is a powder keg, and American military involvement there costs lives, money, and political capital. Voters in 2026 will be choosing between candidates who want to maintain or even increase our Middle East presence versus those who think we should get out and let regional powers sort out their own problems. North Korea is still there, still developing nuclear weapons and missiles, still unpredictable. We have nearly 30,000 troops in South Korea and significant forces in Japan. Do we maintain that commitment indefinitely? What if North Korea provokes another crisis? What if they test a missile that can reach the American homeland? These aren't hypothetical scenarios. They're real possibilities that the next Congress might have to address. Let me talk about something that's changing warfare itself. Technology. The nature of military conflict is evolving faster than ever before. Drones, from small quadcopters to massive armed UAVs, are changing battlefield tactics. We saw this in Ukraine, where cheap commercial drones became devastating weapons. Cyber warfare is a real and growing threat. Foreign adversaries can potentially shut down our power grids, disrupt financial systems, corrupt data, and sow chaos without firing a shot. We're investing billions in cyber defense, but we're in an arms race where the offense often has the advantage. Artificial intelligence is being integrated into weapons systems, intelligence analysis, logistics, and command and control. Autonomous weapons that can select and engage targets without human intervention are no longer science fiction. They raise profound ethical and strategic questions. What happens when AI makes mistakes? Who's accountable when an autonomous weapon kills civilians? Can we trust machines to make life and death decisions? Space is increasingly militarized. China and Russia have developed anti-satellite weapons. We rely on satellites for communications, navigation, intelligence, and early warning of missile launches. If adversaries can blind us by destroying our satellites, our military effectiveness degrades dramatically. We've established the Space Force as a new military branch, but we're still figuring out how to fight and win in that domain. Hypersonic weapons that travel at 5 times the speed of sound or faster are being developed by China, Russia, and the United States. These weapons are nearly impossible to defend against with current systems. They could strike targets anywhere in the world within minutes. The strategic implications are staggering. The 2026 midterms will determine how much we invest in these technologies. Will we pour resources into AI research and development? Will we accelerate hypersonic programs? Will we expand Space Force? Will we prioritize cyber capabilities over traditional hardware? These are expensive choices with opportunity costs. Money spent on one thing can't be spent on another. And we need members of Congress who understand these issues well enough to make informed decisions. Unfortunately, military technology is complex and evolving rapidly. Many politicians struggle to grasp the details. They rely on briefings from the Pentagon, defense contractors, and think tanks. But those sources have their own agendas and biases. Voters need to elect people who will ask tough questions, demand accountability, and think strategically about where to invest limited resources. Here's something that hits close to home. Literally, domestic military installations and their economic impact. There are roughly 500 military installations across the United States. Bases, ports, airfields, training ranges, research facilities, and more. These installations employ millions of people directly and indirectly. They pump billions of dollars into local economies. In many communities, the military base is the largest employer and economic engine. Congressional representatives fight hard to protect bases in their districts. Base closures are politically toxic. The base realignment and closure process, known as BRAC, hasn't been authorized since 2005 because no politician wants to be responsible for shutting down a base and devastating a local economy. But the Pentagon argues that we have more infrastructure than we need, that maintaining excess bases wastes money that could be better spent on readiness and modernization. The 2026 elections will feature candidates promising to protect local bases and defend jobs. But responsible governance might require making hard choices about consolidating installations, closing outdated facilities, and realigning our infrastructure to match current strategic needs. Voters will have to decide whether they want representatives who pander to local interests or who take a broader view of national security requirements. That's not an easy choice, especially if your job or your community's prosperity depends on that base staying open. Let's get personal for a moment and talk about the politics of military service itself. For most of American history, military service was broadly distributed across society. During World War II, roughly 16 million Americans served out of a population of about 130 million. That's more than 10% of the entire population. Everyone knew someone in uniform. Everyone had skin in the game. After Vietnam, we ended the draft and moved to an all-volunteer force. That had many advantages. Professional military, higher quality recruits, no one forced to serve against their will. But it also created distance between the military and civilian society. Now less than 1% of Americans serve in the military. Most Americans don't know anyone in uniform. For many people, the military is an abstraction. Something they see in movies or on the news, but not part of their daily reality. This creates a civil-military divide. Politicians can vote to send troops into combat without worrying that it will affect their own families or their constituents' families. Most members of Congress don't have children in the military. Most come from districts where military service is rare. They can make decisions about war and peace without personal consequences. Some argue this makes them more likely to choose military solutions to problems that might be solved through diplomacy. Others counter that the all-volunteer force is more effective precisely because it's professional and that requiring everyone to serve would lower quality. This debate will continue in the 2026 elections and beyond. Should we maintain the all-volunteer force? Should we create incentives for broader participation in military service? Should we institute some form of national service that includes but isn't limited to military options? These are fundamental questions about citizenship, obligation, and the relationship between individuals and the state. Now I want to address something uncomfortable but necessary. Sexual assault and harassment in the military. This has been a persistent problem for decades. Despite reforms, awareness campaigns, and leadership emphasis, service members, especially women, continue to experience sexual assault and harassment at unacceptable rates. The military justice system has been criticized for protecting perpetrators, especially when they're senior officers or well-connected. Victims often face retaliation for reporting. Careers are destroyed, trust is shattered, and the institution's credibility suffers. Recent reforms have changed how these cases are handled, removing some decisions from the chain of command and creating independent prosecutors. But implementation is ongoing, and the results aren't yet clear. The 2026 elections will bring members of Congress who will oversee these reforms, hold hearings, demand accountability, and decide whether to push for additional changes. Voters should pay attention to candidates' positions on this issue. Do they take it seriously? Do they understand the scope of the problem? Are they willing to challenge military leadership when necessary? Or do they just offer platitudes and move on? Similarly, extremism in the ranks has become a concern. The January 6th Capitol attack included some veterans and even a few active duty service members. The Pentagon has undertaken reviews to identify and root out extremism, but it's a delicate balance. We want service members to think critically and have diverse political views. We don't want to create a political litmus test for service. But we also can't tolerate people in uniform who espouse racism, advocate violence, or belong to extremist organizations. Where's the line? How do we enforce standards without chilling legitimate political expression? These are tough questions, and the people elected in 2026 will influence how the military addresses them. Let's talk money again, but from a different angle. The defense industry. The United States has the most powerful defense industrial base in the world. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and General Dynamics build everything from fighter jets to submarines to missile defense systems. They employ hundreds of thousands of people. They drive innovation. They give America a technological edge. But they also have enormous political influence. Defense contractors spend millions on lobbying. They make campaign contributions. They locate facilities strategically in key congressional districts to ensure political support. The revolving door between the Pentagon and defense contractors is well documented. Senior military officers retire and take high-paying jobs with companies they used to oversee. Former government officials become lobbyists for the industry. This creates conflicts of interest and raises questions about whether we're building the weapons we need or the weapons that are most profitable for contractors. Some weapons programs run billions over budget and years behind schedule, yet they continue because they have political support. The F-35 fighter jet program, for example, has been plagued with cost overruns and technical problems, but it's too big to fail and employs people in nearly every state. The 2026 elections will determine whether Congress provides tougher oversight of defense spending, demands better accountability from contractors, or continues business as usual. Reform-minded candidates talk about cutting waste and making the Pentagon pass an audit, something it has failed to do despite being required by law. But entrenched interests resist change. Defense spending is big business, and business wants it to keep flowing. Here's a question that's going to become more urgent. What do we owe the families of fallen service members? Since September 11, 2001, roughly 7,000 U.S. service members have died in combat or combat-related incidents in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other operations. 7,000 families received that knock on the door, that phone call, that devastating news that changed everything. We provide death benefits, burial with honors, survivor benefits for spouses and children. But is it enough? Gold Star families, as they're known, often struggle financially, emotionally, and practically. Spouses have to rebuild lives. Children grow up without a parent. Some families feel forgotten once the initial sympathy fades. There are organizations that help, but the government's role varies. The 2026 elections will bring members of Congress who will decide whether to expand survivor benefits, create new support programs, or maintain current levels. It's a question of values. What do we owe those who gave everything? Let me turn to something hopeful. The GI Bill, one of the most successful government programs ever created. After World War II, the original GI Bill helped millions of veterans get college educations, buy homes, and start businesses. It created the modern middle class and drove decades of prosperity. Today's GI Bill, formerly the Post-9/11 GI Bill, provides education benefits for veterans and in some cases their family members. It's helped hundreds of thousands of veterans transition to civilian careers. It's a recruiting tool and a way of honoring service. But it's expensive, and there are debates about expanding or modifying it. Should it cover more vocational training? Should it be easier to transfer benefits to spouses and children? Should there be more support for housing and living expenses while students are in school? The 2026 Congress will make decisions about funding levels and program rules. Veterans and their families are watching. Climate change is affecting the military in ways most people don't consider. Installations are threatened by rising sea levels, extreme weather, and changing environmental conditions. Norfolk Naval Station, the largest naval base in the world, faces chronic flooding. Bases in the west deal with wildfires. Training ranges in the south cope with hurricanes. Overseas, instability caused by climate-related droughts, famines, and resource conflicts creates security challenges. The military has studied climate change as a threat multiplier, something that makes existing problems worse. But there's political resistance to acknowledging this. Some view climate concerns as liberal politics that don't belong in military planning. Others see it as a practical readiness issue. The 2026 elections will influence whether the Pentagon can plan for and invest in climate resilience, or whether those efforts get defunded and dismissed. Immigration and the military intersect in interesting ways. We have a program called MAVNI, Military Accessions Vital to National Interest, that allowed certain immigrants with critical skills like language proficiency or medical training to join the military in exchange for accelerated paths to citizenship. It's been scaled back in recent years due to security concerns, but thousands of immigrants have served honorably and become citizens through military service. There's also DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and debates about whether DACA recipients should be allowed to serve. Some argue that anyone willing to wear the uniform and risk their life for America should be welcomed. Others worry about security vetting and believe citizenship should come first. The 2026 elections will feature candidates with strong views on both sides. Military service and immigration policy are colliding, and voters will decide which approach prevails. Let's talk about what happens when things go wrong. Accountability for military failures. The Afghanistan withdrawal in August 2021 was chaotic. 13 U.S. service members were killed in a suicide bombing at Kabul airport. Americans and Afghan allies were left behind. Equipment worth billions fell into Taliban hands. The images were devastating. Many Americans demanded accountability. Who made the decisions? Why wasn't the withdrawal better planned? Should senior officials resign or be fired? These questions haven't been fully answered to everyone's satisfaction. The 2026 midterms will determine who conducts oversight, who holds hearings, who demands answers. Different parties have different incentives. The party in power wants to move on. The opposition wants investigations. Voters need to decide what kind of accountability they expect when military operations fail. Similarly, the Iraq War was launched based on intelligence about weapons of mass destruction that turned out to be wrong. Thousands of Americans died. Trillions of dollars were spent. The region was destabilized in ways we're still dealing with. Yet there was limited accountability for the intelligence failures and policy decisions. The same pattern plays out again and again. Military operations go poorly. Lives are lost. Money is wasted. Reports are written. Lessons are supposedly learned. But the same mistakes get repeated. Breaking this cycle requires members of Congress willing to ask hard questions, challenge conventional wisdom, and hold both civilian and military leaders accountable. The 2026 elections are an opportunity to elect such people. Here's something that should matter to every American: the readiness crisis. Military readiness means the ability to fight and win if called upon. It depends on training, equipment, personnel, and resources. And by many measures, readiness has declined in recent years. Why? Decades of continuous operations in Iraq and Afghanistan wore out equipment and exhausted personnel. Budgets faced constraints and sequestration. Maintenance was deferred. Training time was reduced. Recruitment struggles left units understaffed. The Navy has dealt with collisions and accidents, some fatal, caused in part by inadequate training and overworked crews. The Air Force has aging aircraft that break down frequently and are expensive to maintain. The Army has struggled to balance ongoing deployments with the need to prepare for high-end conflict against sophisticated adversaries. Readiness costs money, time, and sustained commitment. It's not glamorous. It doesn't win headlines, but it's absolutely essential. An unready military can't deter aggression. It invites challenges from adversaries. And if war comes, unready forces pay in blood for gaps in training and equipment. The 2026 elections will determine whether Congress invests in readiness or continues to kick the can down the road. It's not a sexy campaign issue. Candidates won't get many votes promising to fund more training exercises and spare parts. But it might be one of the most important things they do. I want to spend a minute on something deeply personal: military culture and identity. Service members are shaped by their experiences in ways that civilians often don't understand. The bonds formed in units, the shared hardships, the pride in service, the sense of being part of something larger than yourself. These aren't abstract concepts. They're core to military identity. And when service members transition out, they often struggle to find that same sense of purpose and belonging in civilian life. The transition process is critical. We need programs that help veterans translate military skills to civilian jobs, navigate education systems, connect with resources, and build new communities. The VA has transition assistance programs, but they're often inadequate. The 2026 elections will influence funding and priorities for these programs. We can do better for people who've given years of their lives to service. There's also the question of how civilians view military service. Is it respected? Honored? Taken for granted? Forgotten? In some communities, especially those with military traditions, service is deeply respected. In others, it's barely acknowledged. We see this on holidays like Memorial Day and Veterans Day, which for many Americans are just days off work rather than opportunities to reflect on sacrifice. We see it in how veterans are treated when they return. We see it in whether communities support military families. This cultural dimension matters because it affects whether young people choose to serve, how veterans are treated, and whether the nation maintains a strong civic-military relationship. Now let's address something controversial: privatization and outsourcing. Over the past few decades, the military has increasingly relied on contractors for functions that used to be performed by uniformed personnel or civil service employees. Contractors handle logistics, security, training, maintenance, food service, construction, intelligence analysis, and even combat support in some cases. This has advantages: flexibility, specialized expertise, potential cost savings. But it also has downsides. Contractors are expensive, often more so than government employees when you account for profit margins. They're not always subject to the same accountability and oversight. In war zones, armed contractors have been involved in incidents that damaged America's reputation. The relationship between contractors and the military can create dependencies where the government loses the ability to perform functions itself. The 2026 elections will influence whether we continue down the privatization path or bring more functions back in-house. Let me talk about nuclear weapons because we can't avoid it. The United States maintains a nuclear triad of land-based missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and bomber-delivered weapons. This arsenal is aging and requires modernization. The estimated cost is over $1 trillion over the next 30 years. That's an enormous investment. Supporters argue it's essential for deterrence, that our nuclear weapons prevent major war by making the cost unthinkable for any adversary. Critics question whether we need so many weapons, whether the money could be better spent elsewhere, and whether nuclear modernization increases risks of accidental war or arms races. The 2026 elections will bring members of Congress who will vote on nuclear weapons funding. Do we proceed with full modernization? Do we scale back? Do we invest more in arms control and disarmament? These are literally existential questions. Here's something you might not know: the military's role in domestic emergencies. When hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, or other disasters strike, the military often responds. National Guard units are activated to help with evacuations, search and rescue, security, and logistics. Active duty forces can be deployed under certain circumstances. The military has resources and capabilities that civilian agencies don't, but there are limits and concerns. The Posse Comitatus Act restricts using federal troops for domestic law enforcement. We don't want a militarized police state. But in genuine emergencies, military assistance can save lives. Finding the right balance is important. The 2026 elections will determine who oversees these policies and how flexible or restrictive the rules should be. I want to circle back to something fundamental: the decision to go to war. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, but that hasn't happened since World War II. Instead, presidents have used authorizations for the use of military force, AUMFs, that are often vague and open-ended. The 2001 AUMF, passed after September 11th, has been used to justify operations in multiple countries against various groups for over 2 decades. This concentration of war-making power in the executive branch troubles people across the political spectrum. Some want Congress to reassert its constitutional role, to debate and vote before military action. Others argue that modern threats require presidential flexibility, and that congressional debate could be slow and reveal sensitive information. The 2026 elections will determine whether Congress pushes back against executive overreach or continues to defer on matters of war and peace. Let's talk about something that affects daily life for millions: military healthcare. The Defense Health Agency manages one of the largest healthcare systems in the country, serving active duty members, retirees, and their families. TRICARE is the insurance program. For many military families, healthcare is a major quality of life issue. Access to specialists, mental health services, dental care, and prescription drugs varies widely. Some installations have excellent facilities. Others are understaffed and outdated. Retirees often struggle with TRICARE coverage gaps and pharmacy issues. The 2026 elections will influence healthcare funding, whether to expand civilian care options, and how to address mental health needs. These are kitchen table issues for military families, and they vote. I need to mention something that's becoming more visible: women in combat. The military opened all combat roles to women in 2015. Since then, women have served as infantry officers, special operations soldiers, fighter pilots, and in every other capacity. They've proven themselves in combat. They've earned respect, but integration hasn't been seamless. There are still cultural challenges, questions about physical standards, debates about unit cohesion, and ongoing concerns about sexual harassment and assault. Some argue that standards have been lowered to accommodate women, and that this compromises effectiveness. Others insist that many women meet or exceed standards, and that diversity strengthens the force. The 2026 elections will bring members of Congress who will oversee these policies. Their views on women in combat, gender integration, and related issues will shape military personnel policy for years to come. Here's a big one: alliances. The United States has treaty alliances with dozens of countries. NATO in Europe, bilateral treaties with Japan and South Korea, partnerships throughout the Indo-Pacific, relationships in the Middle East and Latin America. These alliances have been the foundation of American security strategy since World War II. They amplify American power, share burdens, and create networks of cooperation. But they're also expensive and sometimes frustrating. Allies don't always contribute their fair share. They pursue policies we disagree with. They drag us into conflicts we might otherwise avoid. There's been increasing debate about whether our alliances are worth the cost, whether allies are free riding on American protection, and whether we should pull back and let other countries defend themselves. The 2026 elections will determine whether we strengthen alliances, maintain them at current levels, or begin to disengage. This is one of the most consequential strategic questions facing America. Let me bring this closer to home. Military voting. Service members and their families vote, and their votes matter. But military voting faces unique challenges. Deployments, frequent moves, and overseas assignments make it harder to participate. Absentee ballots don't always arrive in time. States have different rules. Some service members feel disconnected from local politics in places they're stationed temporarily. Yet military voters can swing close elections. Both parties work to capture military votes, but service members don't vote as a monolith. They have diverse views shaped by personal experiences, values, and policy preferences. The 2026 elections will test whether campaigns effectively reach military voters and whether those voters feel that candidates understand and address their concerns. Here's something that should make everyone uncomfortable. War crimes and rules of engagement. American forces are bound by laws of war, Geneva Conventions, and rules of engagement designed to minimize civilian casualties and prevent atrocities. But war is chaotic and mistakes happen. There have been incidents where American forces killed civilians, destroyed infrastructure, or acted in ways that violated norms. Some cases result in prosecutions and accountability. Others are swept under the rug. Presidential pardons have been issued to service members convicted of war crimes, sparking controversy about whether this undermines military justice and encourages misconduct. The 2026 elections will bring members of Congress who oversee military justice, who can hold hearings, and who can push for accountability or offer cover for misconduct. Where candidates stand on these issues reveals their character and values. Let's talk about something forward-looking. The future of warfare. What will the military look like in 20, 30, 50 years? Will we still have massive aircraft carriers and tanks, or will those be obsolete? Will wars be fought primarily in cyberspace and space? Will autonomous robots replace soldiers on the battlefield? Will genetic engineering create enhanced warriors? Will we fight wars in the Arctic as climate change opens new frontiers? Will artificial intelligence become so advanced that it can outthink human commanders? These aren't science fiction questions. They're real strategic considerations that military planners are grappling with right now. The decisions made by the people elected in 2026 will shape how we invest in future capabilities, what technologies we pursue, and what kind of military we build for the next generation. This requires vision, knowledge, and willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. It requires leaders who can think beyond the next election cycle. Now I want to get real about something we've danced around. Politics and the military. The military is supposed to be apolitical. Service members swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a president or political party. Military leaders are supposed to give their best advice regardless of political considerations. But in recent years, the military has been increasingly politicized. Presidents of both parties have used the military as political props. Generals have been pressured to take partisan positions. Service members have been divided along political lines. There's concern that this undermines civilian control of the military and damages the institution's credibility. The 2026 elections offer a chance to elect leaders who will respect military professionalism, who won't drag the military into partisan battles, and who understand that the military serves the nation, not a party. Let me talk about sacrifice. Real sacrifice. I've mentioned statistics throughout this script. Thousands killed, tens of thousands wounded, billions spent. But statistics don't capture the human reality. The 19-year-old who steps on an IED and loses both legs. The 35-year-old sergeant with PTSD who can't sleep, can't hold down a job, can't connect with her family. The 8-year-old who doesn't remember what his dad looks like because he's been deployed for most of his life. The 70-year-old veteran dying alone because the VA can't get him into a bed. The The spouse who holds the family together through deployment after deployment and never gets thanked. The parent who buries a child and tries to make sense of a sacrifice that can never make sense. These are real people, real families, real pain. And the decisions made by the people we elect in 2026 will affect whether more families endure these sacrifices, whether those who have sacrificed receive the support they deserve, and whether future generations will be asked to serve and sacrifice in their turn. Here's a truth that needs to be said. Not all military spending is good spending. Not all defense programs make us safer. Not every weapons system is necessary. Not every military base serves a strategic purpose. Not every deployment advances American interests. We can support the troops while questioning the policies that put them in harm's way. We can honor service while demanding accountability from leaders. We can invest in defense while cutting waste. These aren't contradictions. They're the essence of responsible citizenship. The 2026 elections should be about electing people who can hold these truths in tension, who can make tough choices, who can say no to powerful interests when necessary, and who can prioritize the welfare of service members and the security of the nation over political expediency. As we come toward the end here, I want to emphasize what's really at stake. The 2026 midterms aren't just about Republicans versus Democrats. They're not just about who controls Congress for 2 years. They're about fundamental questions that will shape America's role in the world and the lives of millions of service members, veterans, and their families. Will we maintain the strongest military in the world or allow our capabilities to erode? Will we honor our commitments to allies or retreat into isolation? Will we care for those who've worn the uniform or treat them as disposable? Will we make wise decisions about when to use military force or stumble into unnecessary wars? Will we prepare for future threats or cling to outdated strategies? Will we demand accountability from leaders or accept business as usual? Will we bridge the civil-military divide or let it widen further? These questions don't have simple answers. Reasonable people disagree. That's democracy. But disagreement requires engagement. It requires voters to educate themselves, to listen to different perspectives, to think critically about what they hear, and to vote based on something more than party loyalty or 30-second attack ads. Military affairs are complex. National security is complicated. But the principles aren't. Do we keep faith with those who serve? Do we make decisions based on facts and strategic thinking rather than politics and profit? Do we ask hard questions and demand honest answers? Do we remember that behind every policy decision are human beings whose lives are affected? So here's what I'm asking you to do. Between now and November 2026, pay attention. Learn about the candidates in your district and your state. Find out their positions on military spending, veterans benefits, foreign policy, and national security. Ask questions. Demand specifics. Don't settle for platitudes. Look at their records if they've held office before. See how they voted on defense bills, VA funding, war authorizations. Talk to veterans and military families in your community. Listen to their experiences and concerns. Read beyond headlines. Understand the complexities. And then vote. Vote like lives depend on it, because they do. The military doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's made up of our neighbors, our classmates, our family members. It's funded by our tax dollars. It operates under policies made by people we elect. We all have a stake in getting this right. The 2026 midterms are our opportunity to shape the future of American military power and to determine whether we live up to our obligations to those who serve. That's what these elections mean. Not abstract political theories or ideological point scoring, but real consequences for real people. The choice is ours. Let's make it count.